Hi guys, and if you're at David McInnes's wonderful talk yesterday, you've already had a brief little window on Padlet, so that was terrific. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is introduce you to a very simple tool. I'm going to assume that you haven't used it before. As far as I know, David has used it, but if you have used it before, apologies if you hear things you already know, but I'll assume no knowledge. So the idea today is to introduce you to this very simple online tool that basically functions as an electronic whiteboard. So I'm just going to go through some of the basic functions of Padlet and explore how you can use it in your tutorials and lectures to encourage participation, because that's what I see as one of the key values and benefits of using Padlet. So just as a bit of an idea, so in your courses, how many people have participation as a percentage of your students' marks in courses? So quite a few of you, yep. So I think that's quite common. So this is, and it's certainly the case at the University of Queensland where I teach. So pretty much every course in literature, writing, etc., a certain percentage, it's usually about 20%, is for participation. And this means not only students just turning up, they have to be active participants. So I think the challenge for our teaching techniques is how do we encourage and facilitate participation? And not only for that particular course, but I think it's increasingly a really important transferable skill which they can use in other courses and other activities and fields, etc. So I think there's always a risk if in our tutorials, if we only stick to the large group discussion format, what you end up getting is you get a few students that are very confident, dominant. They will dominate, say, 80% of the tutorial discussion. Then you'll get a few other people joining in a bit. And then you'll have at least 5 students that are, just never say anything. And I think that's a real problem. And we're doing all our students a disservice if we let that kind of dynamic take over. So, that doesn't really help anyone grow with their skills. So I've been thinking about this over the last 3 years, and I came across Padlet and I've been using it increasingly in my teaching, and I think it has really, really helped in that area. Okay, so what is it? It's an electronic whiteboard. So this was their old logo, a place where everyone can participate. Their new logo is collaborate better, be more productive, and I think both of those logos are actually spot on. So I've been trialling it in a number of activities, and I've really found it very useful for encouraging participation and really facilitating most, if not all, of the students actually saying and doing things in the tutorial. So I've gone from that sort of dynamic where you've got, a small handful doing all of the talking to a tutorial structure where I'd say 95% of the students are actually participating and having to actively contribute. Okay, so electronic whiteboard that you create online, and you create it together. So each Padlet has a unique URL, and you can copy and paste that URL to your Blackboard site or whatever software you use for convening your courses. So that's very, very easy for the students to go into their Blackboard site during your tutorial and just link through to that Padlet, which I'll show you in a minute. So it's creating access for multiple users. So you're basically creating a document together during the tutorial, and anyone with that URL can add content. So it's a fantastic e-tool for sharing, communal creating. So it's really about, building knowledge together, etc. Okay, so how do we get into it? The great thing about Padlet is it's free to use. You simply go to padlet.com and set up an account. That's for your general public setting, and when you create your Padlets, probably you'll have to use the public setting so that's easy for your students to get into the Padlets. Now, your university may want to obtain a site license. So UQ has recently got a site license. So then we go through padletuq.padlet.org. So, if you find that it's useful and that you're creating a lot of Padlets, you might want to talk to your university about setting up a site license. Okay, so once you've set up an account, this is what your dashboard will look like. It's super easy to use. Anytime you want to create a Padlet, you just click on the button saying make a Padlet. And also it creates a history. So all the previous Padlets that you've created are all there. So you can keep them for archive purposes or you can delete them as you need to. They also give you a gallery of examples so you can get ideas about how to use them, and I'll show you some of the different ones that we've created. Okay, so when you click on creating a new Padlet, it gives you different options for what sort of Padlet you want. I generally just use the wall format. That's pretty easy, but you can experiment with different types. So a screen will come up. There'll be different background colours. You add a title. You decide on your privacy setting. So if you're just using Padlet.com, you'll click on public because that's the easiest. And then once the students have got the URL, all they have to do is go in on their devices, either through their course website or directly to the URL. And all they have to do is double click and it creates a window on that Padlet. Okay, so it's ideal for using in small group discussion. So you put your groups into small groups, pairs, etc. They then create a window and create a record of their discussion. They can generate points, commentary on a set task, questions, etc. So the Padlet grows as students add their windows. And what's really nice about this in the classroom is it gives you a bird's eye view on exactly what's happening. Often I'll get each group to create their own team name. So the students quite like this. So they'll have a bit of a giggle, set up their team name. So you can see the team names at the top or whatever. And you can tell at a glance who is struggling. So some groups will be on fire and you can see their little window filling up with all sorts of ideas, and then there might be a group and there's nothing happening or one line, and so you can immediately tell who's talking about what they did on the weekend, and then you can troubleshoot, go over to that group and help them to get going, etc. So it's a really valuable tool for giving you a bird's eye view of what's happening. So what kind of stuff can you add? You can put images, you can put web links. So the one that David showed yesterday I thought was great because it had links to different articles and then commentary from the students. You can see that one down the bottom, they put in a graph. We were looking at a particular novel there. You can put web links, you can put video. So if you're analysing a Shakespearean film, you can put a little clip in there and then they can comment on it. So there's incredible, there's lots of possibilities. So I've put a few ideas about how to use Padlet in your Shakespeare tutorials. So I've tried these different things. You can get the students to pick a theme from a particular play, which they can discuss, or you can all discuss the same theme and they might have different takes on that. You can have quotations, so a student might, one group might choose a particular quotation from a scene and then kind of build out a discussion from there. You can do a close reading, so you can pick a passage and then the different groups can analyse what's going on in that passage. You can use secondary sources, so you can have discussion on the readings that you've set for that week. I've also used it when students are developing their thesis arguments for their research essays. So often, as you know, with their research essays, it's hard to get students to really kind of drill down on what they are arguing. So sometimes we've done exercises where they have to start their window with, in this essay, I will argue that. So it really, and then we kind of workshop their thesis statements, and so that's been a really useful one. What else? We've created communal resources on useful web resources on particular Shakespeare plays, or as I mentioned, uploading a video. So lots of other, there's plenty of ideas of what you could use it for. Not only Shakespeare, you can use it in teaching novels. So we've done exercises where, particularly if you've got quite a sizable novel, you can divide the novel between, into different sections, and each group has to make some commentary on the different parts of the novel. And what's also great is that the Padlet stays up there. So anytime the student wants to go back to these Padlets, it's always there via the course site. So it's fantastic, the students tell me, for revision, before exams or an essay. I've also used Padlet in creative writing classes. So I've been using it in a course on Poetics. And this can be really good where students are getting together word clusters that they're then going to build on in writing their poetry, etc. So you can see here they're exploring different words. I've also used it for style guide practice. So maybe at your uni you expect all the students to write in a particular style. So at UQ they're expected to write in MLA style. And so this is really useful for workshopping it, because you can get each group to write, an entry, a book entry, journal article, etc. And then we can all workshop it and check that everybody knows how to follow the style guide. And then you can have a link through to, say, our MLA or whatever style you're using. Now, I've mostly used it in tutorials, but I have used it in lectures as well, and this can be really fun. So, for example, I used it in a lecture where we were looking at different screen adaptations of Jane Austen. So we showed a couple of clips from different versions, different adaptations, and then we put the students into groups. And it's a nice way of breaking up a long lecture. So if you've got kind of 1.5 hour lecture slot, to stop the students falling asleep midway, you can use it as a little activity to get some active learning going. I think it's really good for building cohorts and confidence. It's a really nice way of getting the students to know each other. I try and encourage them to be in different groups, so move around, always introduce themselves before they start working on their Padlet entries. Good for team building. And it's why it really works with participation is they're not just sitting in their seats creating their Padlets. They know that, so I might give them, say, 20 minutes to work on their Padlets. So after that, each group has to come up one by one and address the whole group and talk about their Padlet window. And I expect each person in the group to say something. So there might be a group of 4. They know they're going to have to come up to the front. And you can even get the quietest, most timid student, they just have to make one point. And you can see some students just really blossom from the beginning of semester to the end. And they're up the front with, 3 other students, so it's not completely intimidating. But what I say to them is I really want the students to own this kind of position of power at the front and to try and get a more circular, more kind of even learning sort of space, rather than, the teacher always being at the front. So what happens is you get a really nice dynamic in your tutorials, because at the end you've got all these different students coming up to the front, talking about their Padlet. In some exercises, I get them to, devise questions which they are then going to ask the audience. So they are initiating the discussion. So it's great because you're forcing everyone to participate, and it means that their participation scores really go up. This is also fantastic for non-English speakers, because if most of our assessment, is all about English skills, writing skills, which of course is all important, but it just gives them a real boost with that 20% participation rate, and I think that really helps with their marks and confidence overall. So yeah, the Padlet remains on the site as a record of the tutorial. I hadn't thought of this before, but students have said to me, when they're sick or they have to miss a tutorial for any reason, they say it's fantastic because they can just click through and they can find out what happened in that tutorial. They can catch up, they can see what everyone discussed, they can go through to the links, so it makes them feel not so panicked about missing information, etc. And they can go back for revision and see whatever information they need to catch up. And as I mentioned, if you post the URL, because the URLs are quite long and complicated, it's much easier just to create that link through your Blackboard site, and then it makes it easier for the students to access. And then you can also share the Padlets with your colleagues. So you might say, look, this exercise worked really well. You can send your colleagues the link and they can see exactly what they've done. It's also great if you're tutoring for somebody in someone else's course. So it gives the course convener an idea of what sort of material you're covering in your tutorials, etc. Posts can be easily moved around and edited. So obviously, the students are pretty good. I've never had any inappropriate content that has had to be removed. Only the student can work on their window. So you can't actually go in and edit other people's windows. You can move them around, but they're the writers for that window, etc. And I think Padlet is consistent with active learning approaches. As we know, active approaches are consistent with reconfiguring student roles from passive recipients of information to active participants. And I think that these active approaches really have the potential to facilitate deep approaches to learning, specifically the intention to understand. So it just gets, you end up with a deeper understanding of the text because you've really got in there and created, your thoughts instead of just students sitting there passively in a large group discussion or not carrying their weight in a small group. And I think this is a really nice quote by Parker Palmer. Passion for the subject propels the subject, not the teacher, into the centre of the learning circle. And when a great thing is in their midst, students have direct access to the energy of learning and of life. And I think the great thing about using these Padlets in your tutes, it puts the text, the Shakespeare play or whatever you're looking at, right in the centre, and that's the focus, rather than ourselves as teachers or the students. So it has the potential to empower students, and that's what we really want, to empower our students so they feel confident in talking about text, etc. Some other things, you could use it for work meetings, you could use it for keeping records of minutes, keeping track of ideas, contributions from groups. You can use it in Q&A sessions if you want to keep a record, if you have a speaker, etc. So here's just a few Padlets that I used last semester. So this is an activity that we were doing on the Witch of Edmonton. And I always like to give the students plenty of choice so they can find their own ways into the text. So they could either choose a character to examine, or they could choose a particular scene. So you can see the windows that they have created. This one on Dr. Faustus, each group was given a different act and they had to pick out some points to discuss from that particular act. Macbeth, they could pick a character or a particular scene to analyse. This is Dr. Faustus, they're given different acts. Love's Labour's Lost again, different acts to analyse. And it's amazing how different. Every group will pick out different things to look at. So some of them have put quotes, which then they've discussed once they're at the front, or particular themes, characters, etc. This one, they were all given a particular scene, the play within a play in Henry IV Part 1, and so they all had a different take on it. Okay, this is in a Jane Austen course, analysing screen adaptations. This was drafting poems. They had to draft poems in particular form, so the villanelle. So this was good because they were creating poems, in groups, and a lot of the students, haven't written poetry before. This is a really nice way of building confidence because they're all writing a poem together. This one, this was in a course and they were looking at the novel A Room with a View. So they had to devise questions that they were then going to put to the class and the students. So a great way, they're initiating the questions, they are generating the discussion, etc. So as I said, you can archive them, really useful if you're teaching the same course again, and you can see what sort of points the students raise, so you can archive them or delete them. Now, I don't think I'm going to have time to do this exercise, but I'll just show you. Okay, so if you wanted to go in and have a bit of a look, if you have got a device on you, so if you go to padlet.com/Victoria_Bladen and then put in those numbers, if you want to have a bit of a play on your phone or laptop. So you'll see all you have to do. So there I put some questions, so you might put your tute questions or whatever. Double click anywhere on that screen and that opens up your little box. So then you can type your thoughts, you can add a link, you can upload something, whatever. So you can have a little play around with that to get a feel of it. If you want to come up after this session is over and have a bit of a play, you're very welcome to. Okay, so that's, so just to conclude, Padlet it's free. It really encourages students to participate, get involved in the tutorials. It can really add some energy. It's good for cohort building. So it's all about how you use it. And, that there is a real emphasis now on, universities want us to use digital tools. And I think this is a really good example of a digital tool that is super easy to use, but it's being used for, a really good purpose, and that is to facilitate participation. So we shouldn't be using e-tools just because they're e-tools as such. We want to think about why we're using them. And I think this is really useful for getting students up on their feet and talking and building confidence, etc. So that's pretty much everything from me. And now I'm going to hand over to wonderful Lucy and Alistair.
Please join me in thanking Victoria.